Part 1. A Sinister Christmas Invitation. The Scream. That shattered Christmas Eve was supposed to be silent. At Gorston Hall. The ancient country mansion crouched beneath a pale winter sky. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Snow lay undisturbed on the hedges, the gardens frozen into ghostly perfection. Inside, the house glowed with festive warmth, crackling fires, candlelight trembling against oak-paneled walls, garlands hanging heavy with holly and red ribbon. And then it happened. A scream, raw, animal, and filled with terror, ripped through the house. It cut straight through laughter, through clinking glasses, through the illusion of family harmony. For one eternal second, the sound seemed to freeze time itself. No one yet knew that Christmas had just become a crime scene. No one yet knew that by morning a man would be dead behind a locked door, and no one yet knew that this was exactly what Simeon Lee had wanted all along. 1. Gorston Hall. A house built on power. Gorston Hall had stood for centuries. Its thick stone walls designed to endure storms, wars, and secrets. It was not a warm house despite the Christmas decorations. Its corridors were long and echoing, its staircases steep and narrow, its rooms filled with shadows even at midday. The house reflected its master perfectly. Simeon Lee had built his fortune with ruthless determination. Born into poverty, he clawed his way upward, leaving broken partnerships and bitter enemies behind him. He trusted no one, loved no one, except perhaps money itself. Now old and crippled, confined mostly to his chair, Simeon Lee ruled Gorston Hall with the same iron grip he had used in business. Age had not softened him. If anything, it had sharpened his cruelty. Servants feared him. Family resented him. Everyone obeyed him, and this Christmas, he had summoned them all. 2. The invitation that no one could refuse. The invitations arrived in identical cream envelopes, sealed with red wax. Each bore the same short, commanding message. You are expected at Gorston Hall for Christmas. Do not disappoint me. No expressions of affection. No explanations. No choice for Simeon Lee's sons, daughters-in-law, grandchildren, and distant relatives. The message carried an unspoken threat. Come or suffer the consequences. Money had a way of enforcing obedience. 3. Alfred Lee. The dutiful son Alfred Lee arrived first. A thin, nervous man in his early 40s, Alfred had spent his life living in the shadow of his father. He managed Simeon's affairs with careful efficiency, yet never escaped the feeling that he was being constantly judged, and found wanting. As his wife Lydia stepped out of the car, Alfred glanced up at the looming house. Same as ever, he murmured. Lydia Lee was elegant, composed, and observant. Where Alfred was timid, Lydia was quietly strong. She had learned long ago that Simeon Lee's house was a battlefield, and that survival depended on self-control. Let's get it over with, she said, calmly, but even Lydia could not entirely suppress the chill that crept up her spine as the doors of Gorston Hall opened to receive them. 4. George Lee. The bitter brother George Lee arrived next, his manner stiff, his smile forced. Once a successful businessman, George had fallen out violently with his father years earlier. Simeon had ruined him financially deliberately and never apologized. George had never forgiven him. His wife Magdalene, glamorous and restless, surveyed the house with open disdain. Why did we come? She demanded. George answered through clenched teeth. Because he wanted us here. And because deep down, George still longed for something he would never receive. Acknowledgement. 5. David Lee. The angry son David Lee came with resentment burning just beneath the surface. An artist by nature, David had been disowned by Simeon for refusing to join the family business. He despised his father's cruelty and materialism, and yet, like the others, he came when summoned. His wife Hilda walked beside him, quiet and practical, already sensing the emotional landmines ahead. David paused at the threshold of Gorston Hall. This place, he muttered. is a monument to everything he values. And nothing I do. 6. The outsider. Pilar Estrevados. Last to arrive was Pilar Estrevados. Young, vibrant, and impossibly cheerful, Pilar brought color into the gray winter afternoon. Officially, she was Simeon Lee's granddaughter raised abroad after the death of her parents. Unlike the others, Pilar showed no fear of Gorston Hall. Christmas with family, she exclaimed brightly. How wonderful! Her laughter echoed strangely down the corridor. Some smiles, however. Hide more than joy. 7. Simeon Lee appears. They gathered in the great hall as Simeon Lee was wheeled in. His body was frail, twisted by age, but his eyes were sharp, cold, and calculating. He studied his family like a general inspecting prisoners of war. So, he said softly, you came. There was no welcome, no warmth, only satisfaction. I thought it time, Simeon continued, that we spend Christmas together. A family should not drift apart. The irony was not lost on anyone. As servants poured drinks and the fire crackled, Simeon began what he enjoyed most: provocation. He mocked George's failures. He dismissed David's art as worthless. He reminded Alfred how utterly dependent he was. Each word was deliberate, each insult precise. By the time dinner was announced, tension filled the room thicker than the scent of pine and roast meat. Simeon Lee smiled. 8. A Christmas feast of hatred. Dinner was a performance. Conversation sparkled on the surface, while beneath it, resentment festered. Silverware clinked sharply. Wine was poured too quickly. Glances were exchanged, some hostile, some calculating. Simeon presided over it all like a cruel conductor, drawing discord from his orchestra. You all want something from me, he said suddenly. Don't pretend otherwise. Silence followed. Money, he continued. Security, forgiveness, power. He leaned back, eyes gleaming. Perhaps, he said softly, this Christmas will be memorable. 9. Night falls on Gorston Hall. As the night deepened, guests retired uneasily to their rooms. The house creaked and sighed, old wood contracting in the cold. Somewhere a clock ticked loudly, counting down unseen seconds. Simeon Lee was taken to his private suite, his sanctum, where he locked himself in for the night. Outside his door, shadows stretched long across the corridor. Inside, a man waited. 10. The calm before the scream. Midnight approached. Snow began to fall again, soft and relentless. And then a scream shattered the stillness, a scream filled with terror, pain, and finality. Servants ran. Family members burst from their rooms. Footsteps thundered down the corridor towards Simeon Lee's locked door. Behind it, something unspeakable had occurred, something that would turn Christmas into a nightmare, something that would soon demand the attention of one man, Hercule Poirot. Part 2. The locked room of death. A door that refused to open. The door would not open. Men pushed. Women screamed. Fists pounded against the thick oak panel. Behind that locked door lay Simeon Lee, alive just moments ago, screaming in terror. Now, only silence answered. Christmas Eve had crossed an invisible line. Close in the corridor, the scream had come from Simeon Lee's private suite, sharp, guttural, unmistakably human. It had torn through Gorston Hall like a blade. Alfred Lee was the first to reach the corridor. What was that? He gasped, his face pale. Behind him came Lydia, calm but alert, already observing everything. Who arrived first? Who hesitated? Who seemed too composed? David and Hilda emerged from the opposite end. David's expression thunderous. That came from Father's room, David said. I know it did. George arrived moments later, followed by Magdalene, who clutched her robe tightly around her shoulders. And then there was Pilar, wide-eyed, breathing fast, yet strangely fascinated rather than frightened. The servants gathered at a distance, whispering prayers under their breath, all eyes fixed on the door at the end of the corridor. Simeon Lee's door. Locked. 2. The first attempt. Alfred seized the handle and twisted it violently. "Father!" he shouted. "Father, answer me!" Nothing. He tried again. "Locked. Break it down," David barked. "He might still be alive." 2 footmen rushed forward. Together with George, they slammed their shoulders against the door. Once, twice. On the third blow, the lock splintered. The door burst open, and the smell hit them first. 3. The scene. Inside, Simeon Lee lay on the floor beside his bed. His nightclothes were soaked in blood, dark, almost black in the dim light. Blood streaked the walls, the furniture, even the bedposts. As though a violent struggle had taken place. A shattered glass lay nearby. The window was open, curtains fluttering slightly in the cold air. For a moment, no one moved. Then Magdalene screamed. Lydia instinctively stepped forward, stopping Alfred before he could rush in. "Don't touch anything," she said sharply. Simeon Lee was unmistakably dead. 4. A murder most brutal. The brutality of the murder shocked even those who hated him. This was no quiet killing, no gentle slipping away. This was rage. Whoever had killed Simeon Lee had wanted him to suffer. David clenched his fists. "He deserved it," he muttered. Hilda shot him a warning glance. George said nothing, but his jaw tightened. Only Pilar crossed herself quietly. "It's terrible," she whispered. On Christmas Eve. The irony was almost unbearable. 5. The locked room problem. Inspector Johnson of the local police arrived swiftly. Summoned by telephone. He was a methodical man, not easily impressed, but the moment he examined the scene, his brow furrowed. The door was locked from the inside. He asked. "Yes," Alfred replied. "We had to break it down. No other entrance?" Johnson asked. "There is the window," Lydia said, gesturing. Johnson examined it carefully. "It opens onto a narrow ledge," he noted. "No footprints in the snow below. No ladder. No rope." He turned back to the room. "So," he said slowly, "we have a dead man in a locked room, with no obvious way in or out. The classic nightmare of every investigator. 6. Suspects everywhere." Johnson wasted no time. "You were all in the house at the time of the scream?" "Yes," Alfred answered. "Everyone. Then everyone is a suspect." The words settled heavily in the room. Johnson began questioning immediately. Who had last seen Simeon Lee alive? What time had they retired? Had anyone heard anything unusual before the scream? Answers came hesitantly. David admitted he had argued with his father earlier. George confessed to long-standing hatred. Magdalene hinted at financial desperation. Even Alfred, the dutiful son, could not deny years of humiliation. Motive was everywhere. Opportunity. 2-7. A curious detail, as Johnson examined the room more closely. Something struck him as odd. The furniture had been overturned, but not randomly. "This struggle," he murmured. "It looks theatrical." He bent down, examining the broken glass. "Any idea what was in this?" he asked. "Water," Alfred said. "Father kept water by his bed." Johnson nodded slowly. Then he noticed the fire. It had been burning earlier, but now it was out. "Strange," he muttered. Lydia, watching closely, said nothing, but she remembered something. Simeon Lee always kept his fire roaring. Always. 8. Pilar's uneasy presence. Inspector Johnson turned to Pilar. "You were raised abroad, Miss Estravados?" "Yes," she replied brightly. "In Spain mostly. Then South America. And your relationship with Mr. Lee?" She smiled faintly. "He was my grandfather." Johnson studied her carefully. "You seem remarkably calm." She shrugged. "Death does not frighten me. Life does." The answer lingered in the air. Unsettling. 9. The doctor's verdict. The local doctor arrived soon after a brief examination. He straightened. "Death was instantaneous, or nearly so," he said. "Severe blood loss. The wound was inflicted with great force. A weapon? Johnson asked. The doctor shook his head. Nothing obvious. Possibly something sharp and heavy. Something that was now missing. 10. The Christmas house becomes a prison. Inspector Johnson made a swift decision. No one leaves Gorston Hall, he announced. This house is now under police control. A murmur spread through the family. Christmas dinner forgotten. Gifts abandoned. Joy extinguished. Outside, snow continued to fall, sealing the house off from the world. Inside, a killer walked freely. 11. The name that changes everything as Johnson prepared to send for further assistance. The superintendent leaned closer. There's one man, he said, who might enjoy this sort of puzzle. Johnson raised an eyebrow. Who? Hercule Poirot. The name landed like a spark in darkness. Yes, Johnson said slowly. The Belgian. He's staying nearby, I believe. He turned back toward the family. For now, he said, try to rest. Tomorrow, the real investigation begins. Tomorrow, a man with little gray cells would enter Gorston Hall. And nothing would ever be the same again. End of Part 2. Cliffhanger. Locked room. A stage struggle. A house full of secrets. And somewhere nearby Hercule Poirot is on his way. Part 3. The arrival of Hercule Poirot, the man who notices what others ignore. When Hercule Poirot arrived at Gorston Hall, he did not rush to see the body. He did not ask dramatic questions. He did not raise his voice. Instead, he stopped just inside the front door, adjusted his immaculate mustache, and truly looked at the house. And in that quiet moment, Poirot already knew one thing. This murder had been carefully staged. 1. A small man enters a big mystery. The snow was falling steadily when the car pulled up to Gorston Hall. From it stepped a compact man, impeccably dressed despite the cold. His shoes gleamed, his coat was perfectly brushed, and his hat sat at a precise angle. Hercule Poirot removed his gloves slowly. Mon ami, he said to Inspector Johnson, a murder at Christmas. It is never accidental. Johnson allowed himself a thin smile. I was hoping you'd say yes. Poirot's eyes flicked past him to the house, the servants, the family members standing stiffly in the hall. So many faces, Poirot murmured. And already I see fear, anger, impatience, and calculation. He nodded once. Yes, this will be interesting. 2. First impressions matter. Poirot insisted on meeting everyone before seeing the crime scene. The murderer, he said gently, is not hiding in the room where the body lies. He or she is hiding behind a face. They gathered in the drawing room. Alfred sat rigid, hands clasped. Lydia observed silently. George stared into the fire. Magdalene paced. David looked openly hostile. Hilda sat quietly knitting. Pilar perched on the edge of a chair, bright-eyed. Poirot studied them like a collector examining rare objects. Christmas, he said suddenly. A time for peace, yes? Yet here's so much tension. No one replied. Poirot smiled faintly. Good. Silence is often more honest than words. 3. Poirot meets Simeon Lee. Too late only. Then did Poirot allow Johnson to escort him to the bedroom. He paused at the threshold. Locked room murders, Poirot sighed. They appeal greatly to the imagination and to the ego of the killer. The scene inside was exactly as Johnson had described, but Poirot noticed different things. The position of the furniture, the pattern of blood on the walls, the broken glass, the extinguished fire, the open window. This, Poirot said quietly, is not chaos. Johnson frowned. It looks violent enough. Ah, but violence can be choreographed, Poirot replied. True chaos has no symmetry. He crouched slightly, peering at the floor. The struggle occurred, he continued, but not in the way it appears. Johnson leaned closer. You think the scene was staged? Poirot straightened, smoothing his coat. I am certain of it. 4. The question of time. Poirot turned his attention to the timeline. When was Simeon Lee last seen alive? Shortly after dinner, Alfred said. He dismissed everyone. Poirot nodded. And the scream? Just before midnight. Poirot tapped his temple. So, he murmured, a gap of several hours. Plenty of time for planning. He turned to Lydia. Madame, you noticed something about the fire, yes? Lydia hesitated, then nodded. He never let it go out. Poirot's eyes lit up. Exactly. A man who controls everything. Does not neglect his fire. 5. Alfred Lee under the lens. Poirot questioned Alfred first. You lived with your father? Yes. You depended on him financially? Yes. You feared him? Alfred swallowed. I respected him. Poirot tilted his head. Respect born of fear is still fear. Alfred broke down, insisting he loved his father despite everything. Poirot listened patiently. At the end, he said only, You have motive, monsieur. But motive alone does not make a murderer. 6. George Lee and the poison of resentment. George was next. You hated your father. Poirot said plainly, Yes. George replied without hesitation. You wished him dead? There was a pause. Sometimes. Poirot nodded approvingly. Honesty. It is refreshing. George described Simeon's cruelty, his financial ruin, his humiliation. Poirot listened intently. Strong motive, he concluded. But hatred burns hot, and hot emotions often leave traces. 7. David Lee. Rage and rebellion. David did not bother hiding his anger. He was a monster, he said. If he's dead, good riddance. Poirot studied him. Anger, he said softly, is noisy. David glared. A man who kills in anger, Poirot continued, does not take time to stage a scene. David said nothing. 8. The women who watched. Poirot's questions for the women were quieter but sharper. Magdalene spoke of money. Hilda spoke of peace. Lydia spoke of facts. Poirot found Lydia particularly interesting. You observe everything, he said. It's a habit, she replied. Poirot smiled. Habits reveal character. Then there was Pilar. You are happy, Poirot observed. Yes, she agreed. Even now? Even now. Poirot leaned forward. Tell me, mademoiselle, do you always play the role people expect of you? Her smile faltered, just for a fraction of a second. Poirot noticed. 9. The problem of the window. Poirot returned to the bedroom once more. The window, he murmured. Always the window, no footprints, no marks, no escape. And yet, Poirot said, it serves a purpose. To mislead? Johnson suggested. Exactly. Poirot gestured toward the blood. The killer wished us to believe in a wild, desperate struggle followed by escape. But the truth, Poirot continued, is quieter, cleverer. 10. A thought takes shape that night. Poirot sat alone in the drawing room. The Christmas tree glowed. Softly in the corner, tragically out of place, he closed his eyes. Faces passed through his mind, voices, gestures, silences. The old man, he whispered, wanted drama. And then Poirot's eyes opened. Mon Dieu, he murmured. What if Simeon Lee wanted to die this way? The idea was shocking. And yet it explained everything. End of part 3. Cliffhanger. A staged crime scene. A family full of motives. And a terrifying possibility that the victim himself planned the performance. Part 4. A murder. Designed for deception when the victim is part of the crime. Most murders are puzzles created by killers. This one was different. This was a puzzle created with the victim, and that Hercule Poirot knew made it infinitely more dangerous. 1. Poirot's dangerous thought. Poirot did not share his suspicion immediately that Simeon Lee might have engineered his own murder. Was not an idea to be spoken lightly. Such a notion would shock the police, confuse the family, and perhaps alert the killer. So Poirot kept it to himself. Instead, he watched. A man who plans deception leaves fingerprints not on objects, but on people. 2. Simeon Lee. A man who loved control. Poirot asked Inspector Johnson for Simeon Lee's history. The story was familiar. A ruthless businessman. A tyrant in the home. A manipulator who delighted in testing power. This man, Poirot said quietly, did nothing without reason. Even his cruelty was calculated. Johnson nodded. He enjoyed stirring things up. Poirot's mustache twitched. And Christmas, he said, is the perfect stage. A house full of enemies. Strong emotions. Closed doors. Witnesses everywhere. It would ensure confusion, Poirot continued. Noise, drama, suspects. Johnson frowned. You're suggesting Lee wanted chaos? Poirot did not answer directly. I suggest, he said, that Simeon Lee enjoyed watching people react, even in death. 3. Reconstructing the night. Poirot began reconstructing the evening, minute by minute. Simeon dismissed everyone. He returned to his room. He locked the door. Then hours later, the scream. Why scream? Poirot asked aloud. Johnson replied, because he was being attacked. Or, Poirot countered softly, because he wished to summon an audience. The scream ensured witnesses. The locked door ensured mystery. The violence ensured shock. Everything pointed to performance. 4. The blood that spoke. Too loudly. Poirot examined the bloodstains again. Too much, he murmured. What? Johnson asked. Too much blood on the walls. Too theatrical. It is. Excessive. Poirot demonstrated with his hand. A struggle of that intensity would leave disorder. Yes, but this is almost decorative. Johnson stared. You think someone overdid it? Yes, Poirot said. Deliberately. The killer or killers wanted the room to scream guilt. But guilt, Poirot knew, often shouts when innocence whispers. 5. The shattered glass. Poirot picked up the remains of the broken glass. Water. Johnson reminded him. Poirot nodded. A fragile object, he said. Useful in a drama. It could be smashed to create noise. It could spill to simulate chaos. It could be broken before the murder. And yet, Poirot added, it tells us nothing about the weapon. The real instrument of death was missing. Or perhaps never present. 6. The fire that should not have died. Poirot returned to Lydia Lee. You said the fire was always kept burning. Yes. Even when he slept? Yes, Poirot smiled. Then the fire was extinguished deliberately. To destroy evidence? Johnson suggested. Poirot shook his head. No, to create atmosphere. A darkened room. Flickering shadows. Fear. The fire, Poirot said, was extinguished to heighten drama. 7. Questioning Pilar again. Poirot invited Pilar for another conversation. She entered cheerfully, wrapped in color and warmth that seemed inappropriate for the occasion. You like drama, Poirot said lightly. I like life, Pilar replied. Poirot smiled. Life, he said, and theater are close cousins. Her smile stiffened. You grew up abroad, Poirot continued. Among passionate people. Emotional people. Yes. You admire strength? Yes, even cruelty? Pilar hesitated. Sometimes cruelty is power, she said carefully. Poirot leaned back. A revealing answer, he murmured. 8. The family's alibis. Begin to fray. Poirot reviewed alibis not to confirm them, but to feel their texture. Alfred's was rigid, rehearsed. George's was bitter but consistent. David's was explosive and careless. Magdalene's was slippery. Hilda's was quiet, almost invisible. Lydia's was precise. And Pilar's? Pilar's alibi was flexible. Time seemed to bend around her. Poirot noticed. 9. A visit to the corridor. Poirot walked the corridor outside Simeon Lee's room. How many people passed here before the scream? He asked. Possibly several, Johnson admitted. Poirot nodded. Enough, he said, to ensure confusion. Then he stopped. "There," he said softly. A faint smear on the wall, almost invisible blood. "No wax red wax from a candle." Poirot's eyes sharpened. 10. The candle in the door. Poirot reconstructed the scene in his mind. A candle carried down the corridor. Wax dripping. A door locked from the inside. And yet, Poirot whispered, a lock can deceive. Johnson stared at him. "You think the door was locked after the murder?" Poirot smiled. "I think," he said, "that the door was locked exactly when it needed to be." 11. Simeon. Lee's final game. Poirot returned to his room and sat quietly. Simeon Lee had been old, crippled, weak, but not powerless. He wanted one last victory, Poirot said aloud. One final demonstration of control. To humiliate his family. To trap them. To force them into suspicion. And perhaps, Poirot added softly, to destroy someone he hated most. The question was who? 12. Poirot shares a fragment. Poirot finally spoke to Inspector Johnson. "I believe," he said, "that this murder required cooperation. 2 people?" Johnson asked. "At least." Johnson stiffened. Poirot nodded gravely. A single person could not manage the illusion. The noise. The timing. The lock. Johnson exhaled. A conspiracy. "Yes," Poirot said. "A family affair." 13. Christmas morning without joy. Christmas morning dawned cold and gray. No gifts were opened. No carols sung. The family gathered for breakfast in silence. Every glance carried suspicion. Poirot observed them all. One of them smiled. Just slightly. 14. Poirot notices the smile. Poirot's eyes followed that smile. Not joy. Not relief. Anticipation. The game was not over. And the killer believed they were winning. Poirot adjusted his mustache. "Patience," he murmured. "The truth is nearly ready." End of Part 4. Cliffhanger. A murder staged for an audience. A victim who played his role too well. And evidence pointing not to one killer, but to a partnership born of hatred and blood. Part 5. The hidden alliance. When one killer is not enough, some crimes are born of rage. Some of greed. But the most dangerous crimes are born of shared hatred. Shared hatred. Poirot knew, rarely acts alone. 1. Poirot's new direction by Christmas afternoon. Poirot was no longer asking who killed Simeon Lee. He was asking who planned it together. The crime, Poirot explained quietly to Inspector Johnson, is too symmetrical. Too balanced. One mind could not maintain the illusion while performing the act. Johnson frowned. "You're convinced there were 2? "At least 2, Poirot corrected. "One to act. One to assist. And both," Poirot added softly, "bound by a common grievance. 2, watching. The family interact." Poirot positioned himself where he could observe without intruding. The drawing room. People revealed more when they believed themselves unobserved. Alfred sat stiffly, avoiding eye contact. George paced near the window. David stared into space, jaw clenched. Magdalene spoke too much. Hilda spoke too little. Lydia watched everyone. Pilar laughed. Too easily. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Laughter," he murmured, "can be camouflage." 3. Alfred and Lydia. A marriage of survival. Poirot invited Alfred and Lydia for tea. Alfred was visibly nervous. Lydia was not. "You lived under Simeon Lee's roof," Poirot said gently. "Yes," Alfred replied. "Humiliation can be corrosive," Poirot continued. "It eats away at dignity." Alfred flushed. Poirot turned to Lydia. "And you," he said. "You protected your husband." Lydia met his gaze calmly. "Someone had to." Poirot smiled faintly. "Protection," he said, "sometimes becomes motivation." Lydia did not deny it. 4. George and Magdalene. Love or leverage. George And Magdalene were next. Magdalene complained freely. George was ruined by that man. Ruined. Poirot nodded sympathetically. And you, he said to George, stood to gain if your father died. Yes, George said bluntly. Poirot leaned forward. But you lack subtlety, he said. This crime is subtle. George bristled. Poirot smiled. I eliminate nothing, he said. I simply observe. 5. David and Hilda. Silence speaks. David was aggressive. Hilda was quiet. Poirot focused on Hilda. You are observant, he said. She looked startled. I notice things, she admitted. Such as? Poirot pressed. Hilda hesitated. Footsteps in the night, she said softly. More than one set. Poirot's eyes sharpened. Where? In the corridor, she replied. Before the scream. David turned toward her sharply. You never told me that. Hilda looked away. Poirot made a mental note. 6. Pilar. And the mask of innocence. Poirot saved Pilar for last. She entered with the same bright energy, her eyes sparkling. You enjoy attention, Poirot said casually. She laughed. Doesn't everyone? Poirot tilted his head. You enjoy performance, he corrected. She shrugged. My grandfather enjoyed games too. Poirot leaned forward. Tell me, he said softly, did you love Simeon Lee? Pilar paused. Love? She said slowly. No, but I admired him. Poirot raised an eyebrow. For his cruelty? He asked. For his strength. She replied. The answer chilled the room. 7. A connection. Revealed. Poirot returned to Simeon Lee's study. Among old papers and documents, something stood out. Correspondence. Foreign letters. Different handwriting. Carefully hidden. Poirot read them slowly. His expression darkened. These letters, he said to Johnson, connect two members of the household secretly. Johnson leaned in. A hidden relationship? Yes, Poirot replied. One based on blood and revenge. 8. The motive takes shape. Poirot finally allowed the pieces to align. Simeon Lee had destroyed lives. He had abandoned children. He had rewritten history. Some wounds do not heal. They wanted him to suffer, Poirot said quietly. Not just to die, but to be afraid. Johnson exhaled slowly. And they wanted witnesses. Yes, and suspicion. Everywhere. Yes. Johnson swallowed. You think they planned it for months? Poirot nodded. Perhaps years. 9. The alliance. Poirot imagined it clearly now. Two people. Different personalities. United by pain. One planned. One acted. Both deceived. The locked door. The scream. The staged violence. All designed to turn a family into a battlefield. 10. Poirot sets a trap that evening. Poirot made an announcement. I believe, he said calmly to the family, that I will soon know the truth. Faces reacted instantly. Shock, fear, relief, and one expression, brief but unmistakable alarm. Poirot saw it. 11. The killer's mistake. Later, Poirot examined the candle wax again, then the letters, then Pilar's smile. Too confident, he murmured. Confidence. Poirot knew, often preceded collapse. 12. Christmas night. Titan snow fell harder outside. Inside Gorston Hall, tension coiled like a living thing. Someone was no longer calm. Someone was afraid. Poirot waited. End. Part 5. Cliffhanger. A secret alliance forged in hatred. A victim who invited his own destruction. And two conspirators who believed their performance flawless, until Hercule Poirot began to close the circle. Part 6. The fatal performance unravels every actor eventually. Forgets a linear perfect performance never collapses all at once. It cracks slowly, quietly under the weight of its own lies, and Hercule Poirot knew exactly where to press. 1. Poirot changes the game by the 6th day of investigation. Poirot altered his approach. He stopped questioning directly. Instead, he provoked. A careless remark here. A misleading suggestion there. A false assumption spoken aloud. The guilty. Poirot knew, always corrected mistakes they should have. Ignored. 2. The weapon that was never found. Inspector Johnson grew impatient. We still don't have the weapon, he said. Poirot smiled mildly. Because you are searching for something that was never meant to be found. Johnson stiffened. You think the weapon was removed? No, Poirot replied. I think the weapon never left the room. Johnson stared. Poirot continued calmly. The killer needed an object that would not raise suspicion if missing or if destroyed. He glanced toward the fireplace. Something disposable. Johnson inhaled sharply. You mean a blunt, breakable object, Poirot finished. Capable of terrible damage in the right hands. 3. Re-examining the fire, Poirot returned to Simeon Lee's bedroom. He knelt beside the hearth. The fire was extinguished, he said softly. But not immediately. Johnson watched closely. Someone waited, Poirot continued, until the right moment. Long enough to use it. Johnson frowned. You're suggesting the weapon was burned? Poirot nodded. Consumed by fire. Reduced to ash, Johnson exhaled. That's why we never found it. Yes, Poirot said. Because it no longer exists. 4. The scream revisited. Poirot turned to the most dramatic element of all. The scream. Who heard it? He asked. Everyone had. That is precisely the point, Poirot said. The scream was not instinctive. It was timed. Johnson blinked. Timed? Yes, to ensure witnesses. To establish a precise moment of death. Poirot folded his hands, and to create panic so that observation became impossible. 5. Hilda's forgotten detail. Poirot sought out Hilda again. You mentioned footsteps, he said gently. Yes, she replied. More than one. Did they run? No. Were they hurried? She hesitated. No, they were. Careful. Poirot nodded. People fleeing are careless, he said. People acting out a plan are precise. David shifted uncomfortably. Poirot noticed. 6. Alfred's breakdown. Poirot confronted Alfred privately. You loved your father, Poirot said softly. Alfred nodded. And yet, Poirot continued, you feared him more. Alfred's voice trembled. He humiliated me. Poirot leaned closer. A man humiliated all his life may do one desperate thing to end it. Alfred shook his head violently. I didn't kill him. Poirot nodded. I know. Alfred froze. Poirot continued quietly, but you helped someone who did. Alfred's face drained of color. 7. Pressure. On the alliance. Poirot spoke openly at dinner that night. I believe, he announced calmly, that the crime was committed by two people, one acting, one assisting. Forks froze mid-air. Poirot continued. One of you created the illusion. One carried out the violence. He smiled faintly. Such partnerships rarely survive pressure. Eyes darted. Hands trembled. One person avoided everyone's gaze. 8. Pilers. Confidence cracks. Poirot invited Pilar to walk in the garden. Snow crunched beneath their feet. You admire strength. Poirot said. Yes. And cruelty? She did not answer. Poirot stopped. You admired your grandfather because he reflected something you valued. Her smile faded. And yet, Poirot continued, you did not know him as a child. She stiffened. Poirot leaned in slightly. You knew him as a symbol. Her breathing quickened. 9. The letters reconsidered. Poirot returned to the hidden correspondence. He noticed something. New dates. Patterns. These letters, he said to Johnson, were not casual. They were rehearsals. Johnson's eyes widened. Planning? Yes. Between whom? Poirot did not answer. Not yet. 10. The locked door. Explained. Almost Poirot finally explained part of the impossible trick. The door was locked, he said. But not by the killer inside the room. Johnson frowned. Then how? Poirot smiled. By someone who understood patience and timing. Johnson leaned back slowly. You mean after the murder? Yes, Poirot replied. When the scream had already summoned everyone. Johnson exhaled. That's diabolical. Poirot nodded. And simple. 11. Fear appears that night. Poirot noticed something new. Fear. One conspirator was no longer confident. They watched doors, listened at walls, flinched at footsteps. Poirot saw it and smiled inwardly. 12. Poirot prepares the final act. Poirot summoned Inspector Johnson late that night. Tomorrow, he said quietly, I will expose the truth. Johnson swallowed. All of it? Yes. The murder? The alliance? The deception? Poirot nodded. And the motive, he added softly. Which, he said, is older than this house. End of Part 6. Cliffhanger. A weapon burned to ash. A scream used as a signal. A locked door turned into a lie. And tomorrow Hercule Poirot will force the killers to face the truth they thought buried forever. Part 7. The trap is set. The moment before the mask falls, the most dangerous moment for a killer is not the murder. It is the moment they realize they have been understood. 1. Poirot's quiet confidence. Christmas night had returned to Gorston Hall, but there was no peace in it. Hercule Poirot moved through the house with calm precision. His manner was gentle, almost reassuring. Yet his eyes missed nothing. Inspector Johnson watched him carefully. You seem very certain, Johnson said. Poirot smiled faintly. I am not certain, he replied. I am prepared. Prepared minds, Poirot believed, defeated desperate ones every time. 2. Announcing the gathering that afternoon. Poirot made his move. He requested that everyone be present in the drawing room after dinner. Tonight, he announced politely, we shall speak openly. The effect was immediate. Alfred's hands trembled. George grew rigid. David scowled. Magdalen whispered sharply. Hilda went pale. Lydia remained composed. Pilar smiled, but too tightly. Poirot noticed everything, especially the smile. 3. The killer reacts. Poirot did nothing dramatic. That was the brilliance of it. He spoke casually at dinner about Belgium, about psychology, about Christmas traditions. And yet one person barely touched their food. Another drank too quickly. A third avoided eye contact entirely. Fear had begun to fracture the alliance. Poirot waited. 4. The lie Poirot tells on purpose after dinner. Poirot leaned casually toward Inspector Johnson. By morning, he said loudly enough to be overheard, the forensic report will confirm everything. Johnson blinked. There was no such report. But Poirot was not speaking to Johnson. He was speaking to the guilty, and it worked. A sharp intake of breath. A glass set down too quickly. A look exchanged urgent, warning. Poirot had introduced a ticking clock. 5. Lydia confronts Poirot later. Lydia Lee approached Poirot privately. You are playing a dangerous game, she said quietly. Poirot inclined his head. All games are dangerous, he replied, when truth is the prize. You're pushing people, Lydia said. They might break. Poirot met her gaze. That, he said softly, is precisely the point. Lydia studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded. Be careful, she said. Some truths destroy more than lies. Poirot watched her leave. She is stronger than she knows. He murmured. 6. Pilar's mask slips. Poirot encountered Pilar near the staircase. You seem nervous. Tonight, he said lightly. She laughed. Everyone is. Nervous. Yes, Poirot replied. But not everyone is afraid. Her laughter faltered. Poirot continued gently. You enjoy roles, he said. Bright, charming, untouchable. Silence, and yet, Poirot added, no role survives the final act. Her eyes hardened. You think you know me, she said. Poirot smiled. I know what you want me to think, he corrected. For the first time. Pilar looked truly unsettled. 7. The alliance begins to crack upstairs. Alfred paced his room. Downstairs. Another conspirator sat very still. They had planned everything. The scream. The lock. The fire. The blood. What they had not planned for Hercule Poirot. One of them began to doubt. The other sensed betrayal. Shared hatred. Poirot knew. Rarely endured pressure. 8. Poirot's reconstruction, without names that evening. Poirot addressed Inspector Johnson alone. The murder, he said calmly, occurred earlier than we believed. Johnson nodded slowly. The scream was staged. Yes. And the locked door? Locked later by the accomplice. Johnson exhaled. So one stayed with the body. And the other, Poirot added, controlled the narrative. Johnson stared at him. You know who. Poirot did not answer. Not yet, he said. Tonight, they must reveal themselves. 9. The drawing room fills. The family gathered. Firelight flickered. Shadows stretched long across the walls. Poirot stood near the mantelpiece. Madame et messieurs, he said gently, I thank you for your patience. No one spoke. Poirot continued. This crime was not born of impulse. It was born of history. He let the words settle. Two people, he said, shared that history. A sharp breath escaped someone in the room. 10. The final pressure. Poirot looked slowly from face to face. One of you, he said, believed this was justice. Another flinched. And the other, Poirot continued, believed it was liberation. Silence pressed down like a weight. Poirot stepped forward. The partnership is over, he said quietly. One of you already knows it. Eyes darted. Someone swallowed hard. Someone clenched their fists. 11. The mistake that cannot be undone. Poirot suddenly turned. Why? He asked softly. Did one of you return to the corridor after the scream? The reaction was instant. Too instant. Poirot smiled. There, he said gently. That was the mistake. 12. Poirot delays the blow. Poirot raised a hand. No names, he said. Not yet. A collective exhale filled the room. But tomorrow, Poirot continued, I will explain everything. He met the killer's eyes. Tonight, he said softly, you will not sleep. End of Part 7. Salayaf Afakianzir. The trap is closed. The alliance is broken. And the truth is pressing in from all sides. Tomorrow, Hercule Poirot will name the killers. Part 8. The truth behind the locked door. When the impossible becomes obvious, a locked door does not mean no one entered. It only means someone wanted you to believe that no one could. One morning after a sleepless night, no one at Gorston Hall had slept. Footsteps echoed too loudly. Doors creaked too suddenly. Every sound felt like accusation. Poirot entered the breakfast room precisely on time. Fresh, immaculate, calm. The killers watched him like condemned prisoners watched the clock point to. Poirot begins with the door. Poirot gathered everyone in the drawing room once more. Let us speak, he said gently, about the locked door. All eyes turned toward Simeon Lee's bedroom corridor. You believed, Poirot continued, that the locked door proved the killer was trapped inside. He shook his head. It proves only this, that the door was locked at the correct moment. 3. The timeline rewritten. Poirot stepped closer to the fire. The murder, he said, did not occur at the time of the scream. Murmurs spread. It occurred earlier, Poirot continued, when the house was quiet, and movement went unnoticed. He Raised a finger. The scream came later. A ripple of shock passed through the room. 4. The purpose of the pause of the scream. Poirot's voice remained calm. The scream was not pain, he said. It was a signal. A signal to summon witnesses. A signal to fix the time of death. A signal to end the performance. The scream ensured panic, Poirot added. And panic destroys observation. 5. Who locked the door? Poirot turned toward the corridor. After the scream, he said. Everyone ran toward the bedroom. He paused. Everyone except one person. Silence tightened. That person, Poirot continued, had only one task left. He tapped the air lightly, to lock the door. A gasp escaped someone in the room. 6. How the trick was done. Poirot explained slowly. The lock was not complicated. It required patience, not strength. The accomplice waited. Listen. Then locked the door from the outside at the precise moment when chaos ensured no one would notice. When you broke it down, Poirot said, you destroyed the proof of how easily it was done. Inspector Johnson nodded grimly. 7. The window illusion. And the window? Poirot continued. A distraction. The open window suggested escape. Snow erased footprints. The mind filled gaps. It is always easier, Poirot said softly, to believe in movement than in stillness. 8. The fire and the weapon. Poirot turned to the fireplace. The weapon, he said, was never taken away. Murmurs. It was destroyed, Poirot clarified. Burned. A fragile, brutal object. Easily reduced to ash. Never missed. That is why, Poirot concluded. You never found it. 9. The blood. Reconsidered. Poirot gestured toward an imaginary scene. The blood was excessive, intentionally so. He met their eyes. The killers wanted horror. Shock, distraction. Blood. Poirot knew. Blinded reason. 10. Why two were needed. Poirot straightened. One person could not have done all this, he said. The timing. The lock. The scream. The staging. He paused. 2 were required. No one spoke. You shared the hatred, Poirot said softly. You shared the history. 11. The victim's final role. Poirot's voice lowered. Simeon Lee, he said, was not innocent in his own death. Gasps filled the room. He knew he was hated, Poirot continued. He enjoyed provoking it. Poirot met their eyes. He gave you the stage. The family shifted uncomfortably, but, Poirot added, he did not choose his executioners. 12. Poirot looks directly at them. Poirot's gaze moved slowly across the room. One face flushed. Another paled. A third trembled. The truth, Poirot said quietly, is now complete. Inspector Johnson stepped forward. Poirot, he said, are you ready to name them? Poirot raised a hand, almost. He looked directly at the conspirators. One of you, he said, will confess tonight. The room seemed to shrink. 13. The breaking point. A chair scraped softly. Someone stood, then sat again. Poirot watched without blinking. Fear. He knew, always chose the weakest first. End of Part 8. Salif Fachangizer. The locked door has been explained. The illusion has collapsed. And the killers are running out of places to hide. Next, Hercule Poirot will expose the alliance and name the murderers. Part 9. The confrontation. Truth is never gentle. The truth does not shout. It waits until there is nowhere left to run. 1. The drawing room becomes a courtroom. The drawing room felt smaller than ever. Curtains were drawn. The fire burned low. Shadows clung to every corner. Everyone was present. Poirot stood at the center. Hands folded, expression unreadable. This, he said softly, is the final act. No one moved. 2. Poirot names the pattern. This crime, Poirot began, was not driven by greed. George stiffened. Nor, Poirot continued, was it driven by sudden rage. David's jaw tightened. It was driven, Poirot said quietly. By identity. The word lingered. Simeon Lee destroyed lives, Poirot said. He abandoned children. He erased names. He rewrote bloodlines. Several faces changed color. You did not just hate him, Poirot added. You wanted to correct history. 3. The first name Almas Poirot turned slightly. One of you, he said, is not who you claim to be. A sharp intake of breath echoed in the boutique room. Pilar's smile froze. Poirot watched her closely but did not speak her name. Patience, he murmured. 4. Alfred's. Roll revealed. Poirot turned to Alfred. You lived with your father, he said gently. You knew his habits, his locks, his routines. Alfred's hands shook. You did not kill him, Poirot continued. But you helped. Alfred broke. Yes, he cried. Yes, I helped, but I didn't plan it. Gasps rippled through the room. Poirot nodded sadly. You locked the door, he said. After the scream, Alfred collapsed into a chair, sobbing. I was afraid, he whispered. I thought it was over. Poirot closed his eyes briefly. It was only beginning. 5. The second conspirator. Poirot straightened. Alfred, he said, could not have done this alone. Poirot turned slowly, deliberately, toward Pilar Estravados. Her face was pale, now. No smile. No laughter, only fury. 6. Pilar's identity shattered. You are not Simeon Lee's granddaughter, Poirot said calmly. The room exploded in reaction. That is a lie. Pilar snapped. Poirot shook his head. You are his daughter. Silence crashed down like thunder. Poirot continued, abandoned, forgotten, erased. Pilar's voice trembled with rage. He denied my existence, she hissed. He stole my life. Poirot met her gaze. And you came back, he said. Not for money but for truth. 7. The murder explained. Poirot spoke clearly now. You confronted Simeon Lee privately, he said. You told him who you were. Pilar laughed bitterly. He laughed at me. Poirot nodded. He always enjoyed cruelty. Poirot continued. You struck him, he said. Not in rage but with intention. Pilar's shoulders sagged. Yes, she whispered. I wanted him afraid. Poirot nodded gravely. And Alfred, he said, helped complete the illusion. Alfred wept openly. 8. Why the scream came later. You delayed the scream, Poirot explained. Until Alfred could act. The scream summoned witnesses. The locked door sealed the lie. The fire erased the weapon. It was perfect. Poirot said softly. Too perfect. 9. The cost of revenge. Pilar's voice cracked. He deserved it. Poirot's expression softened, but only slightly. Perhaps, he said. But justice is not revenge. Inspector Johnson stepped forward. Miss Estravados, he said. You are under arrest. Pilar did not resist. She only looked tired. 10. Alfred's final words. Alfred looked up at Poirot. I wanted it to end, he said brokenly. Poirot nodded. It has, he said. But not the way you hoped. 11. The family reacts. George looked stunned. David looked hollow. Lydia closed her eyes slowly. Hilda wept silently. Christmas had stripped them bare. 12. Poirot's final reflection. Poirot stood alone by the fire. Simeon Lee, he said softly, won one final game. But Poirot shook his head, and yet truth wins longer. End of Part 9. Salifa Fechangir. The killers have been named. The illusion has collapsed. But one question remains. What happens after justice? On Christmas morning? Part 10. Justice after Christmas. When the case ends, the silence begins. A murder may end in truth. But truth does not always bring peace. Sometimes it only leaves silence behind. 1. Morning light over Gorston Hall. Christmas morning arrived quietly, Snow lay fresh upon the grounds of Gorston Hall, untouched and innocent, as though the night before had been nothing more than a bad dream. Inside the house, no one spoke. The crime was solved, the killers exposed, yet the weight of it pressed heavier now than before. Truth, once spoken, could not be undone. 2. Pilar faces the end. Pilar Estravados stood by the window as the police prepared to take her away. She no longer looked young, no longer bright. She looked tired. "You found me," she said to Poirot softly. Poirot inclined his head. "You wish to be found," he replied, "even if you did not know it." She looked back at him. "Would you have done the same?" she asked. Poirot paused. "No," he said gently. "I believe justice must never wear the mask of revenge." She nodded once. That was enough. 3. Alfred's quiet arrest. Alfred Lee did not resist either. As inspector, Johnson placed a hand on his shoulder. Alfred barely reacted. "I lived in fear all my life," he said quietly to Poirot. "I thought helping her would finally free me." Poirot looked at him with compassion. "Freedom gained through guilt," he said, "is another kind of prison." Alfred lowered his head. 4. The family left behind. The rest of the family gathered in the drawing room, broken, scattered, stunned. George said nothing. David stared at the floor. Magdalene wept openly. Hilda clutched her hands together. Lydia stood apart, composed yet deeply wounded. Simeon Lee had destroyed them. Long before his death, the murder had merely exposed the ruins. 5. Lydia and Poirot. Lydia approached Poirot quietly. "You solved it," she said. "But I wonder, did anyone truly win?" Poirot considered this. Simeon Lee, he said, ruled through fear. Even in death, he sought control. Lydia nodded slowly. "And did he succeed?" Poirot looked around the room. "No," he said softly, "because the truth ended his power." 6. Poirot's final explanation before leaving. Poirot spoke one last time to Inspector Johnson. "The tragedy," Poirot said, "was not the murder itself." Johnson frowned. "Then what?" "The years that came before it," Poirot replied. "Cruelty plants seeds. Sooner or later, they grow." Johnson sighed. "Still," he said, "the law must act." Poirot nodded. "Yes," he agreed. "But understanding must walk beside justice." 7. A house emptied of shadows by afternoon. The police cars were gone. Gorston Hall stood silent. The Christmas decorations looked absurd, now tinsel without laughter, candles without warmth. Servants began removing them quietly, without Simeon Lee. The house felt smaller, less powerful, almost human. 8. Poirot prepares to leave. Poirot packed his things meticulously. Inspector Johnson accompanied him to the door. "You'll return to Belgium?" Johnson asked. Poirot smiled faintly. "For Christmas," he said. "I prefer peace." He paused, then added, "But peace," he said, "is not the absence of conflict." Johnson raised an eyebrow. "It is the presence of truth." 9. A final look back as Poirot stepped outside. He looked back at Gorston Hall one last time. A house built on control, a family built on fear. Both had collapsed. Poirot adjusted his mustache. "Mon Dieu," he murmured. "Families are the most dangerous mysteries of all." 10. Christmas continues elsewhere. Bells rang. Children laughed. The world moved on. Christmas survived. It always did. But for those who had been inside Gorston Hall, the holiday would never be the same again. Some wounds do not heal. They simply close. 11. Poirot's final words. Poirot's car disappeared down the snow-lined road. The case was closed. Justice had been served. Yet Poirot knew not all mysteries end in happiness. Some end in understanding. And that sometimes was enough. The end. Hercule Poirot's Christmas. Agatha Christie's ultimate festive mystery. A tale of cruelty, deception, and the truth that outlives them all.